Welcome to the Richard Estes lecture, given this year by another Richard, the Professor Baron Richard Layard, of course. Professor Layard needs little introduction. You all know he is well published, and perhaps that he founded the Center for Economic Policy Center for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics. He has published numerous articles and 6 books related to happiness. The first book, Happiness: A New Science, has been translated into 20 different languages and actually encouraged me to pursue this research field some years ago. He is also a co-founding editor of the World Happiness Report, which I'd argue is the most impactful regular publication from the well-being sciences. Impressive enough, but Professor Richard Layard is not only an academic. He has had significant real-world impact. As a member of the UK House of Lords, he's persuaded the British government to develop a large program of psychological therapy, which now treats 700,000 patients per year. That's larger than the size of Luxembourg. He's influenced the UK government to measure well-being as a national statistic and co-founded 2 organizations to produce the greatest happiness that we can, and especially the least misery. That is Action for Happiness, which you'll see a booth outside related to. It's a grassroots movement to promote a happier way of living. And also the World Wellbeing Movement, which is a top-down organization focused on decision makers to make well-being their priority. Today, I understand he is revisiting a long-term interest of his, value for money, now with an updated understanding of value using well-being. It is a great privilege to introduce Professor Layard. Professor, come on up. The floor is yours.
Well, how lovely to be here. I was really thrilled when I was asked to come and do this. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I was really thrilled when I was asked to do this because I think it's true to say that ISQOLS is the organization which more than any other is promoting the view that the only thing that really matters in life is the quality of life. That's the overarching good that we ought to be pursuing in our society. I think all of us, or nearly all of us, believe that. But of course, we're not anywhere near the situation where we have persuaded most of our fellow citizens in our countries to share that point of view. And I want to talk about how can we get this point of view more widely accepted and used both in policymakers and in guiding individual lives. Now, I think the place I want to start is this. Whoops. Sorry, I'll master this eventually. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think, viewed against that criterion, the dashboard approach is too complicated. And it's one reason that we haven't landed the point that we're trying to make about the importance of the quality of life. It's too complicated. It's also not very useful to policymakers because if one policy is best on one criterion and another is better on another criterion, the policymaker is getting no guidance from the dashboard as to which policy to pursue. So we need a situation where we have a single criterion. And what is lacking in the dashboard approach is a distinction, an intellectual distinction, between the final result, the quality of life, how people feel about their lives, how they experience it, from the things which are determining it, community, health, income, freedom, and so on. The dashboard has an equal treatment of the final result and the things which are determining it. And it's really essential that we separate those out. And I'm going to be arguing that the best thing we can do is to measure the final output by life satisfaction, but we'll come back to that. Now, thinking further about the dashboard approach, of course, one way in which you can escape the multiplicity of goals is by turning the dashboard into an index. And some people do that. But then the question is how to weight the different elements in the dashboard. So you could let the politician decide. Different ones would have different sets of weights. It's certainly not a very democratic procedure. Or you could have researchers deciding the weights. And one thing they might do is to take the final output, let's say life satisfaction, regress it on its determinants, get weights on each determinant, and then produce a weighted index of the determinants and say that's our measure of the quality of life. But what's the point of doing that? If your ultimate criterion is, say, life satisfaction, why regress it on the other things and then use the other things to measure life satisfaction? Why not measure life satisfaction directly by itself? And the great thing about life satisfaction is it overcomes a third problem. People attribute different importance to different aspects of their life. We don't all have the same weights in our quality of life function. So when we do a regression, we're just getting the average weights across people. But if you just simply ask a person to evaluate their life, they're using their own weights, and that's a very democratic thing to do, and we're getting their own direct report. So I think that's an overwhelming case for moving from the dashboard, which was a good start, onto a single outcome. And I think that is central to the way forward if we want to make more impact on public opinion. So what I want to talk about is first how we can persuade organisations to adopt quality of life as their goal. And I'll talk mainly about governments, but a bit about schools and businesses. And then I want to end with how individuals should be behaving in the context where what we want is a society of people with a high quality of life and a fairly distributed quality of life. Okay, so with governments, we actually have an open door. It's just ready to step into it. We don't have to tell people to stop doing what they're doing. We can tell them to do it better, because what they are in principle doing is benefit cost analysis. They're estimating the benefits of different policies relative to their cost, and in principle they're choosing the policies that give the highest benefits per euro. And I think that is a wonderful idea. My own history actually is that I didn't become an economist until my 30s. I worked for a committee on higher education, and the day I got to my desk, there was a memo on the table from the Treasury that said, is it more important to expand higher education or to renovate the cities of the north? And I realised I had absolutely no framework for thinking about this at all. And then someone came and gave evidence to us about cost-benefit analysis. I thought that's wonderful. I mean, that's so sensible. So I became an economist. So let me just remind you how benefit-cost analysis works. Oops. I'll get on top of this eventually. It seems to have packed up. Oh no, here we are, it's moving now. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong way up. Okay, there we go. Okay, nearly there. Right, so this is the basic idea of benefit cost analysis, that the government wants to maximise the benefits in the community with a certain fixed amount of money, and therefore it allocates the money to the things that give the best benefits per unit of cost. But of course the issue is how to measure the benefits. So the traditional method, which I discovered when I became an economist, was mainly to look at income or sometimes willingness to pay. If you had evidence on that, for example, you can value time savings by how much people are willing to pay for a quicker journey. But it shocked me at the time, in my 30s, that this was so limited because, of course, it leaves out altogether things which just happen to people over which they have no choice, and therefore there's no evidence of the importance of those things for people, like you lose your job, or you get sick, or you get robbed in the street. Revealed preference tells us nothing about the importance of those in quantitative terms for cost-benefit analysis, whereas we have wonderful equations where we regress well-being on all these different things, and we immediately get coefficients, and sometimes these coefficients are fairly similar from one study to another, and that is how knowledge progresses and how we get more able to do a rational type of cost-benefit analysis. So, as I said, we want to use life satisfaction as the criterion. So we're assuming that there's this one overarching good, all the other goods are inputs into it, and the overarching good is how people feel about their lives, and that is measurable. So just a quick justification of life satisfaction as a measure, as judged by its correlation with things which it might be affecting. This is to show that there is information content in the measure. It doesn't show anything else. It shows that there's information content in the measure. You probably all know these results, but it's a pretty good predictor of mortality, as good as a medical diagnosis. It's a pretty good predictor, certainly, amongst other things, of productivity, including how an individual's productivity varies over time. And the most important, of course, it's an important predictor of whether people will vote for the existing government. So George Ward did this first for national elections in Europe back to the 1970s, and he found that the life satisfaction score in the population was a better predictor whether the government got re-elected than all the economic variables put together. So I think Clinton said it's the economy is stupid. Well, he was the stupid one. It's well-being stupid. That was European elections. It then turned out well in explaining the difference in voting across US counties in the presidential elections in 2012 and 2016 and so on. And it's quite interesting, actually, the last US presidential election, of course, the economy was doing extremely well, but life satisfaction was very low, and the Democratic Party lost. That was totally in line with the findings of the well-being research. So what does that mean? That means that if politicians want to get re-elected, they'd better take quality of life seriously. I mean, this is our number one argument that we've got up our sleeve. So we want the procedures that governments follow when selecting their policies to be based on well-being as the goal. And we've had some success in Britain over this, in a formal sense at least, because there's something called the Treasury Green Book, which lays out how policy proposals from government departments to the Treasury asking for money, how these should be evaluated. And essentially the Green Book says that they should be evaluated in terms of their impact on well-being in the following sense, that the non-income benefits, like unemployment or employment, health, crime-free streets and so on, they are to be measured by the impact of the policy of those things upon life satisfaction. And then you turn that measure in units of life satisfaction back into a monetary value using the relation between income and life satisfaction. Then you add it to the income effects, and that gives you the total measure of benefit. And I'm going to show you in a moment some of the numbers, so let me just repeat what that is. That's, you know what the effect of the policy is on non-income benefits, like employment, and you know what its effect is on income. You turn the non-income benefits back into income using the relation between well-being and income, and then you add it to the income benefits, and that's the measure of benefit, so that's in euros. And so the benefit-cost ratio is benefits in euros relative to cost in euros. And in 2021, we got this endorsed by our new Prime Minister. So that is what is meant to be being used in Britain. I'm not saying it is used universally at all, because there isn't the capacity in the civil service to do this type of analysis at all well developed. But we're moving in that direction. That in principle is what is being done, and I think that Britain is giving a lead to the world on this front, an important lead. So we thought, having got these rules changed, and there being actually at that time no set of worked examples of how to do this available to the civil service, that we should produce some worked examples. So we did this report, which came out last September, and we've just finished turning it into a book. I'd just like to show you some of the results, to show you kind of how interesting it is when you do this. So remember, what we're looking for is a ratio of the benefits in euros to the net cost. So the net cost is the original cost. Let's say we give people a treatment, a healthcare treatment, and then that has some effect on the person's, or some of the treated people's ability to work. That has an effect on tax receipts and on benefit payments. And the net cost is the original cost minus the subsequent savings to the government because of changes in employment, or changes in criminal justice, changes in special needs, etc. So obviously the best policies of all are the ones which have got no net cost, because they're paying for themselves. And it turns out that there are quite a lot. And this is quite interesting, the way the debate is going in Britain, because this relates, of course, to the stated aim of many governments, that growth is their aim. Well, growth is an important means, of course, to an end, particularly because it helps an individual to work and have a higher income, which is good for them. It also saves the government money and reduces the cost, and in some cases completely repays the original cost to the government. So here are some policies we found which completely pay for themselves within a short period of time. So the first of those is something called NHS talking therapies. This is a system, a nationwide system, for treating adults with anxiety disorders or depression with evidence-based psychological therapies, typically about an average of 9 sessions, measuring their output, their their state at every session, so that we know for every single person what the effect on them was, and from that we can infer the effect on employment. And we find that this policy pays for itself within 2 years. There's been a very good randomized trial of this. This has been copied in 6 countries. Very good randomized trial of it in Norway, which showed that the increase in earnings of the people treated against the control group was over the following 5 years stayed much higher over the next 5 years, and in total it came to 5 times the cost of the original treatment. So this shows you, and I think interestingly the British Treasury is now very much onto this, that dealing with mental health issues is a major growth policy as well as a well-being policy. So it's got pretty much everything going for it. We are now campaigning for a parallel service for addiction, and we're hoping to get that in the next budget. That we think will pay for itself again within 2 years. We have managed to get a parallel service set up for school children, also pays for itself. And then the other thing, which is now a big issue in Britain, is employment support for people who are inactive but for reasons of sickness, in the majority of cases mental health, but sometimes other conditions like musculoskeletal conditions. This, again, will pay for itself, but it takes 5 years, we find. So the British government has just announced a policy to spend £1 billion a year on all of this, which I think is absolutely right. What they haven't supported is our aims to get in Britain a decent apprenticeship system going like you have in much of Western Europe. And we haven't got a proper approach to land use either. So these are all issues where there's no net cost. But of course, for most government spending, you expect it to cost something, but that cost has to be justified by the benefits. So here are some of the policies that we looked at. Well-being lessons in schools, pocket parks in very high benefit-cost ratios. To my surprise, I was looking for money to save, but it turns out that R&D subsidies are pretty cost-effective, spending on the police likewise. By contrast, roads on which we automatically just keep on spending money building new roads have a much lower benefit-cost ratio. Railway, similarly. And I think that this raises an issue which probably applies in most countries of the bias towards things you can touch rather than things you can't. And therefore, a bias, we have a very strong bias in Britain at the moment towards physical capital investment rather than human capital investment. And then issues to do with pension age, which I know is a major issue in every country. So we were able to track down what happened to the cohort of people who were exposed to the loss of the pension at the age of 65 and only getting it at 66, as compared with previous cohorts who got it at 65. And the loss of well-being was really remarkably small. So there are very strong arguments, I think, for raising the pension age as one of the major ways of relaxing the government's budget constraint. Now, I've glossed over one really central issue so far, and that is the issue of the distribution of well-being, because I've been talking as though we just add up the well-being of everybody, regardless of who is benefiting. And I don't think that's ethically correct, and I don't think that's how politicians think. So how are we going to deal with the issue of distribution of well-being and the fact that the benefits may be benefiting people who are already very happy or people who are very miserable? We think there are two ways of doing that. One is to identify, when you measure the benefit-cost ratio in using some common unit to convert well-being into money, to in parallel with that, tell the policymaker what was the initial well-being on average of the people who were benefiting. And I think that's going to be very important, because it often turns out that the most easy things to do to increase average well-being are to attack misery. It may be easier in many cases to raise average well-being by attacking misery than by raising the well-being of people who are already further high up. Danny Kahneman, you may remember, sort of thought that the only purpose of government was to alleviate misery. That's obviously nonsense, because we have governments. All of us would have a pretty wretched life if there were no governments. So governments exist to benefit everybody. But we do need to give extra weight to the benefits that occur to people at the bottom end. But I think we have to leave that to the policymakers, because that's an ethical issue. It's not a scientific issue. The other thing, obviously, is that when we're looking for new policies, we're particularly trying to think of ways of reducing misery. That makes it very important to know what are the main causes of misery. Now, I find, I'm a sort of pseudo-politician, but I find that most politicians just automatically assume that poverty is the chief cause of misery. And of course, we probably, all of us here, know that's not true. So this is the results of analysing the British data. This is done as a cross-section. And the biggest single partial correlation coefficient is with a very simple question. Have you ever been diagnosed with anxiety disorders or depression? That turns out to be the strongest single predictor of whether you will have low life satisfaction. Physical health also, probably undermeasured. Whether you have a partner, quality of work. Andrew Clark did independently, whether you're unemployed, and income. But income is essential, and I think probably it's a commonplace amongst all of us here that we want income to be put in its proper place, and that's roughly where it belongs. Well, that's all I want to say about government. Let me have a look at my watch. Let me quickly say something about schools, and then business, and finally individuals. So we're talking about what is the goal of government. We talked about what is the goal of education. Well, obviously, it's simply to develop capacities, increase the happiness of the student, both when they're young and when they're older, and the happiness of the rest of society by the contribution that the student can subsequently make to the community. How are we to get this to happen? In many countries, education increasingly is judged by exam results, but we've got to have things that we put in the way against that. So we need a clear well-being code. It's a very interesting thing for a country for a school to debate amongst its parents, teachers and pupils. What is the objectives and how are we to behave if we are to have a higher level of well-being? Then we need evidence-based life skills teaching, and then we need to be measuring well-being put that in the scale against the test result. Here's an example of an evidence-based life skills course, which I was involved with. It's called Healthy Minds. And we based it on pre-existing modules. As you know, the psychologists amongst you tend to feel constrained as to how long any intervention can be. But ultimately, education is a lot of time available in schools. So we're talking here about a weekly lesson for 4 years, which we based on pre-existing modules that had had successful trials. And this had the effect of raising the well-being of children, life satisfaction, by 0.5 points out of 10, which is close to the effects of finding a job or finding a partner for adults. So it's a significant effect. And I do think we should be fighting for schools to be teaching life skills in an evidence-based way with trained teachers who are trained to use evidence-based materials. And then we need to make sure that we have a system of measurement. And obviously, we're talking about doing it not the whole time, but periodically. And we're saying the schools should be very concerned with, in particular, whether it's improving the happiness of its children relative to some benchmark or not. For this to be taken on in the British context, it's got to be voluntary, but I think it will soon take off if the government made it easy. The system in the Netherlands is that the government, secondary schools in the Netherlands, the government holds the questionnaire and the schools just download it, administer it, and the centre processes it. It's compulsory there, but I think probably elsewhere we'd start voluntary basis. So there's a few thoughts about schools, just a few thoughts about business. What is the point of business? Again, the only point of business and the only justification for it is its effect on the quality of life of shareholders, workers, customers and suppliers. And that, fortunately, was stated to be the case by US Business Roundtable in August 2019. I wouldn't say everybody has suddenly changed their behaviour as a result of that, but it's a good move in the right direction. What sorts of things do we have evidence would make a difference to well-being at work? Certainly more control for the workers. This is the experiment that was done from MIT, giving more participation of workers in the decisions about how the team organised its work, raised happiness by 11%, lowered quitting by 33%. The other thing which I feel personally very strongly about is the negative effects of individual performance-related pay for workers who are working in teams. This creates incredible negative effects on people who don't come out in the top of the ranking, which seem to actually outweigh the effects of the incentives that you might think the thing provides. So the evidence is actually that it's not particularly good for performance, and it's certainly not good for well-being. There's a Danish study which showed that 6 percentage points more of the workforce went on to antidepressants when this was introduced. There is something which I hope you all know about called the World Wellbeing Movement, based in Oxford, which in its website has a playbook of policies for raising worker well-being. So let me conclude before I come to individuals with a thought. If we're going to get quality of life seen as the objective of all these different organisations, we're going to have a hugely improved information base. And you know, we've got to have serious comparison of coefficients and so on. or in other words, we've got to turn this set of studies that has been going on so fruitfully into a field. I believe Max Weber once said, "I'm not a donkey, I have no field." And I think that was a mistake. In fact, he created sociology, and we've got to create the field of well-being science. That is a really important move, I think. And of course, we need it to generate proper careers in this field, not people bobbing in and out of the field because they've still got to publish in their own disciplinary journals. Incredibly important. So with that in mind, when the lockdown came along, and I couldn't persuade Andrew Clark to write it, with Jan the Navy, we wrote this textbook, which I hope can provide a contribution towards thinking of this as a field with a corpus of knowledge that everybody has, as they do in other fields. Finally, let me end on individuals. So what's the aim what's the purpose of life? Well, obviously, in terms of the framework we're talking about here, it must be to create as much happiness in the world as you can. That must be the purpose of our lives on Earth. And I think that is so different from the goal which is certainly offered to children in the Anglophone world, which is to be more successful than other people. This is a dismal goal because it's serious. However hard people try, and they try very hard, the society can't become happier as a result of those efforts. Instead, we've got to have a goal like the one at the top of the slide, positive sum goal, where you're trying to contribute to the happiness of others as well as yourself, and getting some of your happiness personally from your contribution to the happiness of others. That is why we founded this organisation called Action for Happiness. I've got a few of these badges, if anybody wants one. This is what the members pledge. I will try to create more happiness and less unhappiness in the world around me. We've got a large number of members. We've got very good courses. One of them was evaluated, and it had a bigger effect on people's happiness than finding a partner or a job. If you haven't looked at Action Happiness, please have a look at it. But doubtless there are other organisations, humanist organisations and others that are trying to do something very similar. I think this is an incredibly important campaign we're all engaged on, both to change the goals of organisations and the goals of individuals. But I do think that we're not going to land the bullseye unless we have a simple message. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that simple message. I think the idea that what we want is people to be satisfied, fulfilled in their lives, that is a very simple and adequate description of what we want. Incidentally, the question is answered very quickly when survey researchers tell us it's one of the easy questions for people to answer. People know how they feel about their lives pretty well. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all speak with one voice? I mean, we all have an interest in developing some subtle variant, but this is not the most constructive way to push something forward. We will do much better if we can agree on a goal and then have the subtle differences, investigating what causes it. That's a very difficult set of questions, and there's plenty of room for disagreement on that. But I do think if we could have a single goal, we would have a very, very much better chance of converting our fellow citizens to this way of thinking. And if we could, we would surely have a happier world. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Please raise your hands. I can call on you, and you can unmute right here first. Please feel free. Unmute, yeah. Hit the red. Yeah, there you go.
Hello. So your presentation has been fantastic, obviously. I actually work for the European Statistical Office on some social issues, but this includes quality of life, and this has been a very long-standing interest of mine. My frame of thought somehow arrived to a conclusion similar to yours. So I have participated to building a dashboard of indicators, but I quickly became frustrated with it because of the reasons that you have expressed, that when you take everything into account, so you have, I don't know, 100 indicators, and you say that all of them matter, then in the end you cannot pass a consistent message. So then, but what does matter? What should we focus on? So I definitely agree. So I have two questions for you. One is really on measurement. So do you have a specific preference for how to measure life satisfaction? Is a 0 to 10 scale a good measure, or do you have an alternative one? So that would be my first question. And then the second is, yeah, partially a question, partially a commentary, let's say. I have the impression that your perspective as an economist, I'm a sociologist as training, and I think what you said really at the end with the institute or think tank, or then it incorporates more of the fact that the social dimension is often left out. So when you presented those factors that matter the most, you had having a partner, but not, I don't know, something in the direction of community, social support. I have this impression that this is often left out, and also in measurement terms with the dashboards and everything we have, often they include a lot of indicators for which we already have a lot of data. So things related to income and unemployment and education, so these things, but not much less data on so on communities, social support, social networks, social capital, everything that is a bit, let's say, beyond the individual. So thank you.
I think that life satisfaction performed pretty well. One of the issues, obviously, that some of you are concerned about is whether it is a proper cardinal scale. Life satisfaction 0 to 10, not at all, 10 completely. The basic test of that is whether the differences in a test-retest situation are similar at different points on the scale, which Alan Kruger showed they were. So I think it's a good scale in that sense. I gave you some evidence of its correlations with other things which show it's got information content. But the second part of your question sort of went back to this distinction that I was trying to draw between the final experience, do we feel good about our lives, and all the different things that contribute to it. And the social situation is something that contributes to it. It's not a constituent of feeling good, it's a cause of feeling good.
Next question, right here. Please keep your questions brief. You can hit.
Hi, thank you for the talk. A quick question. When it comes to communicating how a country is doing on life satisfaction over time or in comparison, we often go for the mean or the average. And I find it more meaningful to communicate with politicians to say something like, this many thousand people have a life satisfaction which is lower than 4. For example, do you have any thoughts on where the cutoff point is, where we really need to communicate to make an impact among those that really need it? Like how to cluster the 0 to 10 and where to focus?
Interesting question, because we've come to think that, you know, in attempts to draw attention, I mean, you've got to say things in an interesting way to get any public attention, as we know. And the World Wellbeing Movement does an annual report on British well-being, and we've introduced the concept of the well-being poverty line. So that distinguishes the population according to whether they have answered 5 or less or 6 and above. And that turns out, of course, to be something which is very arresting to think about. It's very interesting to people in local government, for example, to see the difference between the well-being populace poverty in their local area compared with other areas, and so on, and then to look at the factors that explain it, which turn out to be similar to the factors, of course, which explain differences between individuals mainly, but there are also some local features as well which can be brought into the account of it. So I think that not just to treat it as a single scale, which is kind of a bit boring. We want people to get used to the scale. I mean, I assume that in the 18th century, nobody had any idea what 20 degrees Celsius was. We now know roughly what 20 degrees Celsius is and what 25 degrees Celsius is. And I hope that, you know, as time passes, people get used to measures of the life satisfaction of a population in terms of its average, and you know, reporting that, which we now do in Britain every 3 months, that this will make some impact and get into the headlines. Unfortunately, we publish it every 3 months in the same press release as the GDP, but the only thing which gets reported is the GDP. So we've got to make some progress, and I think introducing the kind of distinction that you made, more binary or tripartite. Some people have had the tripartite distinction, will add to interest.
So thank you, Sir Richard, for an interesting talk. I'm unfortunately not willing to support your call for a unanimous voice about a single indicator for well-being or the good life. And there are several reasons. One is that your argument that life satisfaction is the ultimate goal in people's life is not correct. It turns out that many people do not consider life satisfactions as the most important for their quality of life. So the argument you say that life satisfaction is a democratic measure is simply wrong, because you impose, as a researcher, life satisfaction as the ultimate goal of quality of life, and that turns out empirically not to be true. And there is another argument that I would like to raise, and that comes from Valerie Muller, who might be here today. Some years ago, she conducted a study in South Africa, finding out that life satisfaction went down when they abolished apartheid. So then you have a dilemma. If life satisfaction is the most important things in life, would you then say that it is more important than abolishing apartheid? Thank you.
I think your first point is a perfectly valid one, that we should try to explore what people want from their lives, but I think they will find it quite difficult to answer the question, because they will think about the means rather than the end. So I have a lot of sympathy. I certainly found it a great clarification when I read the Dalai Lama, who said that the one thing all humans have in common is they want to feel good, they want to be happy. I think this is a huge human universal. The means that people want to be happy differ enormously between people, probably based on their genes, based on their culture. And I'm not sure that you're going to clarify the way in which you think about what is a good situation for a society by asking people that question. If you get different answers in different societies, for example, I mean, if you asked a man in Europe in the 17th century what he wanted to be like, he would surely have said, I want to be a brave fighter. I mean, that was what a man was meant to be. But is that really ultimately what he wanted to be? Or did he want to feel good about himself ultimately? And wasn't it that the culture was making him believe that the way to feel good about himself was to be a good fighter? So I think the problem with your society is, some people will say, I want to be a good fighter, and some people will say, I want to be a good monk. And, where have we got to at the end of all of that? What was the second half?
Apartheid. Apartheid.
I can't comment on that particular thing.
Yes, thank you very much for your talk. How do the big issues of climate change and biodiversity collapse fit within the life satisfaction framework? And my complementary question, is there room to think of the fact that the sum of individual life satisfaction might not equal the common societal happiness?
Well, the argument for controlling climate change is obviously the well-being of future generations. I don't think it's anything else. And biodiversity, people do differ on. There are some people who feel that the state of the inanimate world is a good in itself. I understand that point of view, but that is a different point of view from what I imagine this society is standing for. I think the main argument against climate change has got to be its impact on the well-being of future generations. And and at that point, I do think we should include, of course, all sentient beings. And Buddhists have made a great deal of this, and I think an important area, hopefully, that some members of this society might make progress on is the well-being of non-human sentient beings. That is an important issue. But biodiversity, except insofar as it affects human well-being, that's a different issue. It's not one that I have a particularly strong view of. But on the question of whether we're simply looking at the sum of well-being, I was saying no. We're interested in also the distribution of it, and so when we look at a particular policy which changes the distribution, the simplest way to describe that impact is by two statistics. One, what it does to the average, and two, what is the average well-being of the people who are being positively affected by the policy. I just wanted to come back onto the apartheid question a second, because I think the most serious criticism of this approach, I don't think it's correct criticism, but the most serious one is where do human rights fit into it? And I think the correct way of thinking about rights is the way Jeremy Bentham said. The point of rights is that they are made by men and women. They're humans. Human institutions. We set rights in order to set a floor to well-being.
Thanks. It was a wonderful talk. But I think you can argue that if you base everything on individual perceptions of their life satisfaction, individuals don't perceive or can't perceive all of the things that do contribute to their well-being, particularly things like climate, the protection of climate, biodiversity, even some of the social dimensions. So wouldn't we need additional pieces of information to take that into account? And maybe another way of asking it is, if we're just ask people about their individual life satisfaction, could we not also ask them about their satisfaction with the community, their satisfaction with the rest of nature, their satisfaction with these broader issues outside of the individual?
This is a very interesting question, because obviously our life satisfaction is affected by some things that we are not aware of. The most striking thing that I found recently, I don't know if many of you have been reading this, but the effect of air quality on life satisfaction, for example. Most of us would have no idea that there was such an effect, but it turns out that there is such an effect. That doesn't invalidate life satisfaction as the ultimate good. But it does say that we've got to be very careful about tracking down what is causing it. Please remember that when I say life satisfaction, I don't mean a judgment about anything other than how you feel about your own life. So the fact that you haven't perceived air quality affecting your life doesn't mean that the ultimate variable, how you feel about your life, isn't the overarching good for society.
We are just at time, so I'm afraid that's the last question. If you want to say anything else to close, otherwise we move on to the poster session and lunch. Do you want to say anything? Do you want to say anything in the last one?
No, what a privilege to talk to you all, and what basically fundamental questions we've raised in the discussion. And I would really, I'm here until tomorrow lunchtime. I'd really be happy to continue this debate. I mean, if anybody wants to form a little group where we can go in a corner and continue discussing this anytime today or tomorrow morning, I'd be really happy to do that, because I do think that your organization is central to this worldwide movement that we're talking about. And it would be wonderful if we could somehow move nearer to talking about a common objective, and then having the debate more about what is determining it, which is an extraordinarily complicated and difficult thing to elucidate. I think that would be a massively valuable thing for the world if that could happen in the society.
Thank you.